father points a loaded gun at his own son. Not a stranger, not an enemy. His son, the person he crossed dimensions, or whatever you want to call that town, to find. That is the moment from season 4 decided to go places most horror shows would never dare. And look, I have watched a lot of television. I have seen a lot of betrayals. But this one hit differently because the writers spent 3 whole seasons making you believe Henry Kavanaugh was one of the good ones. Then season 4 dismantled that belief piece by piece, and the finale finished the job. Today we're going deep on what actually happened in that scene, what the actors themselves said about it, and what it all means heading into season 5, which is confirmed to be the final chapter of this story. Stay with me on this one because there's a lot more going on under the surface than just a man losing his mind. Before we talk about the gun scene, you need to understand what the show did to get Henry there because this was not a snap decision. This was a slow burn across an entire season. Henry Kavanaugh spent 40 years in the real world believing his family just vanished. His wife Miranda, his son Victor, gone. And then season 3 drops him right into that town, and suddenly his son is alive, but Victor has been trapped there since childhood. Father and son reunited inside a nightmare. Now season 4 introduces Sophia, who is actually the man in yellow wearing a human face. And Sophia has a plan. She starts spiking Henry's drinks with her own blood. Yes, her actual blood. And those blood-laced drinks trigger visions where Henry sees himself lying in a hospital, in a coma, in the real world. And in these visions, a doctor figure tells him something specific. The town is not real. The town is a dream your mind created. And to wake up permanently, you need to sever your connection to it. You need to kill your anchor, the thing tying you to the dream. That anchor, according to the vision, is Victor. Now here is the part that is genuinely terrifying as a piece of psychological horror writing. Henry does not snap all at once. He wobbles. He doubts. He has moments of clarity where he sits at a piano and plays music with his son. There is actual tenderness there. But the visions keep coming, and each time they feel more real, more convincing, more like the truth. Actor Robert Joy, who plays Henry, said in an interview that by the time the gun scene happens, Henry had already been dealing with doubt about which reality was authentic for more than a couple of episodes. And that doubt does not just go away when you wake up from a bad dream. For Henry, it builds into something that eventually overrides the love he has for his son. That is the setup. A man whose brain has been chemically hijacked, whose sense of reality has been dismantled from the inside, standing in a room with a gun pointed at the one person he came to that town to protect. Let me walk you through exactly how the finale handles this moment, because the construction of it is brilliant in a really painful way. The sky in the town turns dark. Not nighttime dark. Something else. And for Henry, that is confirmation. His brain reads it as a sign that reality is glitching, that the coma world is bleeding through. He finds bullets in Victor's belongings. And instead of pausing to question why that feels suspicious, his brain frames it as a message. Confirmation bias working at maximum capacity. He gets the revolver from the sheriff's station. He waits for Victor to come back. And when Victor walks in, he raises the gun. Victor, to his credit, does not immediately understand what is happening. He is confused. He has no idea what his father has been going through. And then Ethan, this young kid, wanders into the room. Ethan is the reason the trigger never gets pulled. His presence breaks Henry's focus just long enough for Victor to knock the gun away. And then Victor loses it. After seasons of being the emotionally contained guy, the one who always measured his words, always regulated himself, he completely breaks open. Scott McCord, who plays Victor, described how the script literally said that Victor rages at his father. Not argues, not confronts, rages. McCord said that in all his time playing Victor, he was always conscious about how Victor manages his emotions. Victor is a man who has survived decades in that town by keeping himself together. But in that moment, the actor made a deliberate choice that Henry needed to really feel the full weight of what he just did. McCord was worried he was being too rough on Robert Joy physically. Joy had to wear body armor for the take. Think about that image. A father in body armor because his son, whom he almost shot, is now grabbing him by the shirt in grief and rage. That is the scene flipped entirely. And Joy pointed out something that makes this even more powerful. Earlier in the season, when Henry broke down at the piano, Victor stayed calm. Victor sat on his emotions. He contained himself. So every single thing he had been holding back during those quieter, more painful moments, it all came out at once in that confrontation. McCord said the rage felt earned. And he is right. Here is the part of this story that I think is being underestimated in a lot of the coverage. The question is not just whether Henry and Victor can repair their relationship. The question is whether Henry still has a functioning mind to bring to that repair. Robert Joy raised this himself when asked about Season 5. His exact concern was not about guilt or redemption in a simple sense. He asked whether his brain can survive what it has been through. He said he thinks Henry physically survives the crisis in the finale. But mentally, he is genuinely uncertain. And if Henry is mentally compromised going forward, Joy asked what happens to his soul. What happens to his love and his loyalty? Where does all of that go, and what might it do under the right circumstances? That last part is the one that should concern you going into the final season. Because remember who is still out there operating in this town. The man in yellow, who has been disguised as Sophia this entire season, is not done. He can transform into anyone who has died in that town. He already exploited Henry once by getting Sophia to spike his drinks. He knows Henry is vulnerable. He knows the exact psychological pressure points to hit. If Henry enters Season 5 in a fractured mental state, he does not just become a liability for the group. He becomes a potential weapon that the man in yellow can pick up and aim at anyone. And the show already gave us that template this season. The vision that told Henry to kill his anchor, the doctor figure in the hospital, that was a system the man in yellow built around him. If Henry is still susceptible to those visions, or if his sense of reality never fully recovers, the same trick could work again with a different target. Robert Joy said there would be a temptation for Henry to retreat into that false world, especially given how painful Victor's reaction was. That retreat, that willingness to believe the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable reality, is exactly the kind of door the man in yellow walks through. Now let us flip to Victor, because while Henry's storyline is emotionally devastating, Victor's situation heading into the final season is arguably the most important in the entire show. And here is something that a lot of casual viewers might not fully register. The showrunners John Griffin and Jeff Pinkner confirmed in a Reddit AMA before the finale that only 4 characters in the entire series trace their lineage back to the town's original souls. 4. Jade, Tabitha, Miranda, and Victor. Everyone else in the town, including Boyd, including most of the residents, they were drawn there because at some crossroads moment in their lives they heard the cries of the children who were sacrificed. They are, to use the show's own term, minnows. Victor is not a minnow. Victor is the only living survivor of the previous cycle. He is the only person who has witnessed the last time the town went through what it is going through now. And the boy in white, the entity that seems to be working against the man in yellow, he speaks to Victor specifically. The bottle tree being pulled in the finale was enormous. Jade knew pulling it would remove the last layer of protection from the area. He made what he thought was a calculated sacrifice. But the consequence is that the town is now more vulnerable than at any point we have seen. Sophia, in her last act before the boy in white confront her in the forest, gathered every talisman she could find and threw them into the faraway tree. The town has no protection. The things that come out at night have fewer barriers now than they have ever had. And Victor is the one who has been warning people about exactly this kind of thing for years. He knew not to pull the bottle tree. He said so. Nobody listened. Again. So going into Season 5, you have a town stripped of its defenses, a fractured father-son relationship at the center of the story, bones retrieved from the caves that may or may not be usable without knowing what to do with them. And Victor, the only person who has the institutional memory to potentially make sense of all of it, in a state of emotional collapse. That is the setup for the final season. Season 5 is confirmed as the end. MGM Plus announced it back in April, and the creative team said the ending has already been written. This was always planned as the conclusion. The showrunners described it with a phrase I thought was interesting. They said questions will be answered and answers will be questioned, which is very from of them to say. But it also suggests the final season is not just going to hand everything over cleanly. There will be more unraveling before there is resolution. Production is set to begin in Halifax, Nova Scotia later in 2026, with a 2027 premiere window. 13 episodes, same as previous seasons. Scott McCord said what he wants most is for the cycle to end. He wants Victor and Henry and Ethan to get out of that town and have a barbecue together, which is honestly the most specific possible happy ending I have ever heard an actor pitch, and it worked. But here is the structural problem that Season 5 has to solve. Victor has been in that town since he was a child. If they escape, and this is a big if, Victor has no life outside of that town to return to. He has no memories of a normal world. The entire framework of his identity was built inside something that was designed to trap and consume people. Henry, assuming his mind recovers, has to somehow rebuild a relationship with a son he pointed a gun at. Victor has to figure out whether forgiveness is even possible, and what healing looks like when the person who hurt you did it because their brain was being chemically poisoned by a supernatural entity wearing a human suit. Those are not small questions. And a show that has spent 4 seasons treating every character with actual psychological nuance is not going to skip over them in the finale. The bones Tabitha and Jade retrieved are almost certainly the key to defeating the man in yellow and breaking the cycle. The boy in white has been pointing toward that information for a long time. But the bones alone are not enough. You need someone who understands what to do with them. You need Victor, which means before anything else can be resolved, Victor needs to be in a mental and emotional state where he can function. And that means the Henry situation cannot just be tabled and dealt with later. It is the first domino. The thing that From has always done well, better than most genre shows, is ground its supernatural horror in human psychology. The monsters that come out at night are terrifying. But the most effective horror in this show has consistently been about what the town does to people's minds, what it does to their relationships, what it costs them to survive. Henry pointing a gun at Victor is the logical endpoint of that kind of horror. Not something external getting in through a window, something internal, something the town cultivated and fed, turning a man against the person he loved most. And now Season 5 has to figure out whether love is actually stronger than whatever that town is. Whether the bonds between these people, as damaged as they are, can hold long enough to end the cycle. Personally, I think Victor gets his barbecue, but I think it is going to cost a lot more than anyone is ready for. Season 5 heads into production later this year. I will be covering every update as it comes. If you are as deep into this mythology as I am, drop your theory in the comments. I want to know what you think those bones actually do.